Everyone wants to know what the man in yellow actually is. That's the wrong question. It's the question every other channel already answered 3 different ways. Here's the one nobody's asking. Where was he? Not who. Where? Because if you actually map out his appearances, episode by episode, season by season, there is a hole in his timeline you could drive a bottle tree through. A stretch of years where the most dangerous entity in Fromville is nowhere to be found. And then Season 4 gave us a scene that quietly answers part of it, while raising a much bigger problem. So today we're building the full timeline. We're going to use the Season 4 finale, the new Season 5 renewal news, and about 200 years of actual folklore to figure out where this thing was, who put him there, and why Season 5 might be about to break the entire show wide open. I'm going to walk you through this like a case file. Evidence first, theories second. Let's get into it. Start with what we actually know for certain. The man in yellow's influence goes back to episode 1. He's the voice pretending to be Thomas on the radio. He's the thing whispering to Sarah, pushing her toward violence. He's the figure Clara meets, the one she convinces herself was only a nightmare. None of that requires him to be standing in the room, and that's the detail everyone skips past. Once the show establishes that magic is real, physical presence stops being a requirement for influence. He can reach people without occupying the same space they're in. Call it long-range possession. Call it whatever you want. The mechanism barely matters. What matters is the pattern. Now compare that to the moments where he shows up in a body. Season 3's ending is the first time we get him standing in front of Jim, unmasked, taking credit for Jim's death directly. Before that, nothing. No physical scene. No body in a room. Just influence at a distance. Then Season 4 escalates this in a way the earlier seasons never did. He's not just a voice anymore. He's wearing Sophia like a coat, walking through town in daylight, collecting talismans door to door. That's a massive shift. Voice-only villain to fully embodied villain, walking among the townspeople, undetected, for an entire season. So here's the real gap in the timeline. Somewhere between whatever happened to Victor's family generations ago and the end of Season 3, this entity goes quiet in the physical sense for what appears to be decades. Then it suddenly starts showing up in the flesh, over and over, escalating fast. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern with a trigger. Something changed. Something led him back into a body that a lot of the theory crafting around this gap circles back to one character. Martin, the man who lived alone in that cabin, deep in the woods, feeding on rats and paranoia for who knows how many years. Now, I'm not going to spend this whole video relitigating whether Martin was secretly the man in yellow in disguise. Other channels have built entire theory series on that. What I want to focus on is something simpler and honestly scarier. Even if you set the disguise theory aside completely, Martin's dialogue still describes exactly the kind of imprisonment we're talking about. Martin tells Boyd he went into a faraway tree and got trapped. Fine. Except Martin also says something that most viewers gloss over. He says sometimes you get trapped, and that's when they get you. Not it. Not the creatures. They. Boyd asks who they are. Martin dodges. He dodges it again a second time. Then the music box starts playing, and suddenly Martin isn't calm anymore. He's rattled. He says they're coming, and whatever they is, it scares him enough to abandon the conversation entirely. If the imprisoning thing here really were just the standard nightly creatures, Martin had no reason to hide the answer. He describes those constantly, in detail, without flinching. The fact that he refuses to name whoever locked him up tells you it's a different category of threat. Something with an identity worth protecting. Something organized enough to imprison rather than simply kill. That's the actual mystery. Not was Martin secretly evil. It's who has the power to cage something as old as the man in yellow, and why would they bother instead of just destroying it? Let's play this out logically. If something imprisoned an entity that can rewrite reality, warp minds from a distance, and outlive generations of trapped townspeople, that something needs to be at least as powerful, arguably more disciplined, because torture and imprisonment take more control than simply devouring someone. The show already planted a group exactly like that, way back in the pilot. Julie's bedtime story to Ethan, the one about secret fairies coming back from the Lake of Tears. At the time, it plays like harmless folklore, a comfort story a father tells his kid. But this show has a habit of burying its real answers inside things that look like throwaway lore. The bottle tree, the talismans, the totems drawn in a kid's notebook. All of it seemed decorative until it wasn't. Here's where it gets interesting, and this is where actual folklore outside the show becomes useful instead of just decorative. In older European folk traditions, long before fairies got the Disney treatment, they were never friendly. Fairy courts in Celtic and British folklore were described as bargaining entities. They didn't grant wishes for free. They traded a favor for a favor, a name for a name, a life for a life. That's not a modern invention for this show. That's centuries-old storytelling. And it lines up disturbingly well with how the man in yellow operates. He doesn't just attack people. He negotiates with them first. Clara gets a deal. Boyd gets a music box and a warning. Sophia offers people exactly what they want, right before it costs them everything. There's also a specific piece of older folklore worth mentioning: the idea of fairies as jailers of their own kind. Some Celtic tales describe rogue or unseelie fairies being bound, imprisoned in trees, hills, or wells by the Seelie court for crimes against the natural order. Bound, not killed, because outright killing something like that was considered dangerous or impossible. Put that next to what we know about the town: a tree that transports people somewhere unpredictable, a music box that seems to summon something the second it plays, a group referenced only once in a bedtime story that's never shown on screen. If you're building a case for who trapped the man in yellow, you don't need to invent anything new. You just connect the dots the show already gave you. Now here's where this theory gets a serious update, because Season 4's ending gave us something no earlier season did. A direct confrontation, on screen, between the man in yellow and the boy in white. For 3.5 seasons, the boy in white was a mystery on his own, helpful in small moments, unreadable in most others. People argued about whether he was good, evil, or just neutral. Season 4 finally answers that. He's actively working against the man in yellow. He's been doing it the whole time, quietly, through Victor, through breadcrumbs, through whatever guidance Boyd gets from what he assumes is a hallucination of his dead friend. The final scene of the season puts them face to face. Sophia, still wearing the man in yellow underneath, throws every talisman in town down the hollow trunk of a faraway tree, stripping the town of its only nighttime protection. The boy in white meets her there. He doesn't stop her. He seems almost relieved that things are finally moving toward an ending, like a piece he's been waiting years to see played. The showrunners were asked directly what that scene means for where the story goes next. Their answer, paraphrased from the interview, was that the man in yellow feeds on suffering, but he doesn't actually know how the story ends either. This isn't something scripted in advance for him. It's a conflict unfolding in real time, the same as everyone else trapped in that town. That single detail reframes everything we just spent the last section building. If the man in yellow doesn't know how this ends, that changes the imprisonment theory too. Maybe he wasn't simply locked away and waiting to be freed on a schedule. Maybe whatever they imprison him actually weaken him permanently, and everything since Season 3 has been him rebuilding power he lost during that gap, one bargain and one talisman at a time. That would explain why his physical presence escalates so fast across 4 seasons. Season 3, one confrontation. Season 4, an entire season spent walking around in Sophia's skin, undetected, dismantling the town's defenses piece by piece. That's not a villain returning to full strength instantly. That's a villain climbing back to full strength in real time, on screen, in front of us. That lets connect this back to Boyd directly. Because if there's a reason the man in yellow's physical return lines up with Boyd's arrival in town, it's not a coincidence the writers would leave unexplained forever. Boyd is the one who insists on digging deeper than any sheriff before him. He's the one who pulls the bottle tree instead of leaving it alone, even after being warned directly by Victor and the boy in white. He's the one whose actions, repeatedly, either weaken the town's protections or trigger events nobody saw coming. If the theory holds, Boyd isn't the villain here. He's something more interesting, the unwitting key. Every structure built to contain whatever's happening in this town, the talismans, the bottle tree, possibly whatever originally caged the man in yellow, gets undone specifically because Boyd refuses to accept the rules other residents learn to live with. That's consistent with everything Season 4 set up. The finale doesn't end with an escape. It ends with the town more exposed than it's ever been. No talismans. No bottle tree. A monster walking free in broad daylight for an entire season. If Season 5 is going to be the endgame the creators promised, it's going to be because Boyd broke the last remaining seal, whatever that seal actually was. Quick update for anyone who hasn't been following the production news, because this actually matters for how much of this gets answered. MGM Plus confirmed Season 5 will be the final season. The announcement came right before Season 4 premiered, which means the writers have had months to plan the ending with intent, rather than scrambling for a renewal decision after the fact. The showrunners have publicly stated the goal for the final season is to deliver real answers. Not just deepen the mystery again. Actual resolution. Production is expected to begin later this year in Nova Scotia, with a targeted release window sometime in 2027. That's consistent with the show's usual production rhythm, since winter shooting conditions in that region have pushed every season toward a similar yearly gap. What that means for us, if the fairy theory, the imprisonment theory, or some combination of both is actually where this is heading, Season 5 is when we'll know for certain. The showrunners have said outright that this was the ending built into the show from the beginning. 5 seasons, always the plan, always building toward this exact confrontation that here's where that leaves us. The man in yellow wasn't simply hiding all those years. Something with real power took him out of the picture, physically, while letting his influence bleed through anyway. Something old enough and disciplined enough to imprison rather than destroy. And Boyd, without meaning to, may have been the one who let it back out, piece by piece, season by season. The finale didn't hand us an answer. It handed us a countdown. Tell me where you land on this. Do you think the fairies from that bedtime story are actually real in this world? Do you think Boyd is responsible for letting this thing back into town? Drop your theory below, because I read every single one of them before I script the next video. If this kind of breakdown is your thing, there's another rabbit hole waiting for you. Who the storyteller actually is, and why that question might matter more than anyone realizes going into the final season. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.